Hi everyone. Thank you very much for being here today for the second day of Abrupt HQ, the parallel programmation of Abrupt Festival this year. We decided to create a program filled with new ideas, new concepts, community gatherings, but also technical workshops where we understand a little bit more what's beyond the artist's mind. Today we dive into the sonic world of Rrose in an intimate interview, hands-on workshop, where we will have reflections on how sound processes and what is the art of stretching perception. For this session, we will be slowing down and listening differently, not to a demonstration, but to a reflection on how sound creates a different type of perception, modifies emotions, and the notions of presence. Today we're here with Rrose. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for showing us all your different tools, all your different philosophies behind electronic music.
I'm not going to show you all my tools.
Some tools today, and it will tease, I guess, also your performance tonight. But with your own words, could you describe what you do, if it's not just a performance, but more than just a DJ set? Can you tell us, with your own words, what you do?
Well, tonight is kind of special because there's two different performances. I'm collaborating with the percussion ensemble, HIT, in the Beaux-Arts in the evening, and then doing a DJ set later in the club. So I think I always appreciate having these kinds of opportunities because I think that's exactly what I do, is that I'm going back and forth between this kind of idea of listening music, concert music, versus club music for dancing. And I try to bring things more from the listening world into the club world rather than vice versa. But it does go both ways for sure.
This talk is called Tools, Techniques, and Emotions, and it's already suggesting that there's a tension between the machine and the human. How do you personally navigate between this tension?
Well, I think that I've always been intrigued by this idea that we can have kind of a relationship with machines and actually kind of get inside them and get them to do things. There's machines. There's this paradox with machines. They are totally deterministic in the sense they're these things that we've created that are supposed to do this thing this way. But when machines reach a certain level of complexity, they do things that we can't predict. And that includes with synthesizers and sound in general. So the machines that make sound do lots of unpredictable things because sound is unpredictable.
They're transgressive a little bit machines at the end, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have some kind of romantic idea that machines are alive in the same way we are. But I think that, we're all existing, we're all atoms in the same space vibrating. So when we're working with a machine, in a way, the machine is an extension of us. So I've always been fascinated with just trying to get machines to surprise me in different ways. So that's kind of how I treat it when I'm twiddling around with things, is I'm trying to, rather than having an idea, I want to make music like this, and then the machine becomes my sort of slave to make that music. I try and engage with the machine as this kind of collaborator. So I have it inform me of things and I respond to that, and I try and find something that surprises me from that, and then use that as some kind of a seed to shape whatever it is I'm creating.
And throughout your path, we know the more artistic version of your persona, but there's also a path where this artistic persona collides with an academic world as well. That is creating what you are today. Can you tell us a bit more about this academic path that helped you also craft the knowledge and the understanding of music that you're making today?
Sure, I have a pretty unusual academic path because I kind of dipped in and out. So, excuse me. When I was an undergraduate in the early 1990s in California, UC Berkeley, I was, 18 years old, and I was more rebellious, and so my relationship with academia, even though I was a good student and I was going to a good school, was a little bit more like to challenge the system, and the rave scene was starting there, and I was kind of more intrigued by that. So I did well in school, but when I took music classes, even when I took computer music classes, just because I was interested in that stuff, I tried it out. I thought it's so boring and so dry. I want to just be out there in the world. So I wasn't ready for it at that time. But what happened is, I ended up not with a music degree, but a cognitive science degree. And then I just started making music in the local scene and being involved with that, and did music for quite a long time. And 13 years later, kind of arrived back at this idea that maybe I'm ready to learn music in the academic way. It actually wasn't just like a sudden thing. It was several years that kind of led me back to that. I didn't have any formal musical training as a kid at all, so it was pretty much self-taught. And the music classes I took, I kind of dismissed them a little bit in the beginning. But I came back around to it. I started practicing piano and getting really obsessed with it, and then ended up going into a master's program for music, which combined experimental music and improvised music and electronic music with, there was also traditional courses you could take. So I was taking theory, music, like harmony, counterpoint, this kind of stuff too, in addition to doing all the experimental stuff. And I was completely immersed. Like, I really loved being in that environment. And so when I came out of it, I actually didn't think I would go back into making club music, which I had been doing for 10, 15 years. But surprisingly, I did. And what happened is it became this kind of fusion. So, it's kind of like this strange path of in and out of the academic world and the dance music world, starting with really no experience and coming into it pretty late. So I think that makes my approach kind of unique, I guess.
And we can for sure hear that both words have been influencing each other. And when I was reading one of your biographies, for instance, there were some very technical terms and almost scientific terms that I would like you maybe to explain, and that can give us maybe an overview of your career, of your philosophy in music. We can read that your work is inspired by your ongoing interest in microtonality, in the limits of perception, and the idiosyncrasies of machines. To understand a little bit better, can you define those words? And is it thanks to this kind of approach that we can understand what's the difference between hearing and listening?
Well, I sort of mentioned about this idea of idiosyncrasies of machines. I think that it kind of goes with this idea of, the limits of perception. So when I'm engaging with machines and sound, I'm trying to find something that I feel is pushing the limits of my own perception, that is confusing to me, that destabilizes my, feeling, and not necessarily in a specific way. So there's a lot, you use the word emotion a lot in the, sort of framing this workshop, and that's a word that I have a strange relationship to, because it can be very loaded, and it means a lot of different things to different people. I think when people talk about emotion, they usually talk about something that you can kind of understand, like, you feel love, you feel sad, you feel happy. And I'm not looking for those kinds of emotions in music. I'm not looking to express those kinds of emotions, but I'm looking to express something that that draws you in, but something that you can't describe, that isn't so easy to understand what it means or what to call it. You know what I mean?
And so, if we're not necessarily talking about emotions, what do you expect listeners to maybe not feel, but how do you expect their bodies, their conscience, their spirits, their you name it? What are you expecting when you are creating, when you're in front of an audience? Is it more of a meditative state? Is it more of a deep understanding of how the sound is made? What kind of reaction do you expect from the people that you have in front of you that are listening to what you do?
Well, I try not to have too many expectations, but I hope that there's at least some people in the audience who are completely immersed in the sound of what I'm doing. So I'm not trying to make music that exists just as a kind of a background to some social activity. So my favorite places to perform are places that really cultivate that focus. So, you know, the bar is in a different room. If there's a bar, that the place for where the dance floor is and the sound system is really dark, and you go in there to experience the sound, and you don't go in there to chat and use your phone and this kind of thing. So that's, I mean, and I think if you, so that depends a lot on the people organizing and how they put together an event and put together a space. So I appreciate it, and a lot of people do that. They cultivate that kind of space that gives a lot of focus. So that helps people achieve some kind of profound experience with the music, you know, because that's, for me, I want it to feel profound, but not necessarily, you know, sometimes people come to me and say they have these experiences, and for me it's great if they try and explain it and it's like a struggle, but they feel moved somehow, you know, and that to me is the best. So instead of like, oh, that was, you know, that was awesome, like just, you know, I don't know, to just, I don't want them to just say that it was good. I want them to say that it sort of moved them in some mysterious way. You know?
Not finding the word sometimes, it's the best way of describing something.
Yeah.
When I was doing some research, I think that not everyone knows, or at least I didn't know, that you also were producing music for other types of contexts than just classical electronic music venues. I saw that you were producing for Gucci, you produced for Scorsese, you produced for Alexander McQueen. How do you approach this type of phases of production when it's not for a classical electronic music setup?
Well, full disclosure, those names sound really nice, but that's from a bio for someone who is trying to get my music licensed for sync stuff, and it's a little hyperbole there. So I can tell you what those projects are. I did. I worked with Harmony Korine. Well, not really. I didn't really work with him, but he just took one of my tracks and used it for a short film that he made that was sponsored by Gucci. So, like, I have no connection to Gucci. It's just a name to drop. In fact, I'm a little uncomfortable with that because in the past, I actually had pretty strong values about not licensing my music to be connected to brands. I've relaxed that a bit, but you know, the Scorsese thing was actually a film. It was a film called A Current War, which was a big Hollywood film that was produced by Martin Scorsese, which had the trailer. The people who made the trailer licensed a track by Lotus Eater, which is a project I have with another artist, Lucy. So that was the soundtrack to the trailer, but it doesn't actually appear in the film. So I'm not even sure if Martin Scorsese has any idea who I am or what that song is. He probably did hear it because he probably saw the trailer at some point. But actually, as I get involved in these things, it's interesting that I didn't even realize this, that when you see a film trailer, a lot of times the music is not even in the film. So just by trying to get some music licensed, I learned about this. So this isn't very like deep philosophical stuff, just behind the scenes business stuff, which I think is interesting because, you know, naming those names, I really don't work with those people directly. It's just sort of like someone says, we want to use this track for this, and I say, okay.
Okay.
So that's kind of the extent of it, to be honest. And it hasn't happened very often, but
Yes.
somehow those few times it did happen, they were linked to some big names, so they can put that in the list to try and sell it.
I was very curious when I read that.
The Alexander McQueen one is a really distant one.
Okay.
I mean, Alexander McQueen is great, but that was a video produced for his fashion show that was about 20-something years ago, and it was a remix I did of an artist named Murkoff that was licensed. So it wasn't an original track of mine, it was a remix. And it was, again, this thing that was sort of like a third-party studio was hired to produce this video. So it was some distant connection there, but you know, I didn't have any communication with Alexander McQueen whatsoever.
They weren't in the studio with you.
No, no.
So let's go back maybe into the processes and the practices of live music. When you start creating and thinking about a performance, about a project, where does it begin? Does it begin with an idea, with a feeling, with a frequency, with a color, with a sound? Tell us where is the starting point of a project?
I don't really have a single type of starting point, you know, so there are times when I have a kind of idea that I try to explore, but it's more often just something that arises out of the process of playing, really, you know. So, and it's this process I described before. Usually, so I guess one thing that might be specific to my approach is I tend to start with just one thing, like one synthesizer or maybe one rhythm or something like this. So I don't really quickly start assembling layers of stuff and trying to build a whole piece. I try and work with some really limited sound source, like one sound that I might be playing with on a synthesizer for a very long time until something emerges from that speaks to me, that's like I'm talking about, plays with my perceptions in some way, and that inspires me to build something around it, and I try and let that lead me to, you know, where I want to go. Of course, there are decisions I have to make, like if I'm making music for the dance floor and I know it has to fit within a certain template, I have to keep those parameters in mind when I'm adding elements. So in that case, there are other influences. Sometimes, though, I try and often like wait as long as possible to add that beat to this. So I try and start with sound usually. I mean, there are other times when I just say I'm going to start with a beat as well. But I think that the more common way I start is with a sound, and to really try and get some kind of a sound that speaks to me before I build other layers around it.
We talked about the beginning. I would like to understand also how you anticipate the end of a set. When I had conversations with other artists that are doing live performances, they often told me, I play, I build something until they tell me to stop. Do you think about the end of a set, or do you let it go until it naturally fades away?
I'm someone who does a lot of planning and preparation for sets, and I'm not someone who kind of shows up and does everything on the fly and then just gets into it and builds stuff from scratch, because I'm not that spontaneous. I'm more patient and careful in how I construct things. So even with my DJ sets, I often know a good 80% of the things I want to play and the order I want to play them for that particular show. But I might be figuring that out on the train like I was today, you know? So I'm lining everything up and going through and testing transitions, but I have like a few options if I want to change my mind in sections. But I actually want to know really what's going to happen in the beginning for sure, and in the end. I want to have an ending, because I usually try and have it coordinated between, like, even with a DJ set, I try and have several pieces, several tracks kind of working together, and I want it to feel like a kind of a complete statement, the whole set. So that's why I don't really do so many of these like all night type of things, because I tend to kind of compose it. That's my approach to it.
I understand. And there's also something that I feel lots of artists are still a little bit shy to compose with, which is silence. How do you include silence in your sound, for instance, in sets or live acts as well?
I wish I had, sort of the courage to incorporate it more, because I think it's very important. But I think when it comes to dance music, it's, everything, it's kind of like we're programmed that things need to be this certain level. I think that my DJ sets have a lot more dynamic range than the average, which is really just sort of like a brick wall, and then like kick drum out, kick drum in, kick drum out, kick drum in. And I try and have much more subtlety in the dynamic shapes. So there are sections in the set where I will get into quieter things. Complete silence is something that with dance music is hard to really work with. But I think that what I do work with a lot is continuous sound that has a kind of hypnotic quality that I think when something is continuous in a certain way for long enough, it's almost a kind of silence. It's like a stillness, but it's not literally silence.
When we interact with artists that have such a long career, that have experience, that have not so much time to go out anymore or to experience what's out there, often we hear that they don't have the time to really like go to other acts. Do you still have the time to experience other live artists, other live performances, other types of music interpretation, or are you one of these artists that stays more in its bubble and produces just for themselves? Or at least like the creative process is more in a more cave atmosphere?
Well, I don't feel too compelled to kind of spend much time in the club on the dance floor with that kind of music, but I engage a lot with other kinds of music. To be honest, when I'm at home and I want to go out to something, then the things that I really want to go out to would be either something kind of on the extreme experimental sound art side of the spectrum, or classical music, which I really love, especially solo piano music, or solo organ music, that kind of thing. So I love concerts like that and go frequently.
Are there maybe some names that you can drop, or some researchers that have been influencing your way of approaching music, or your way of developing your musical experience? Can you tell us maybe some in the research field or some in the artistic field that you would recommend to us, that you would tell us that are good references for understanding you, but also for understanding the genre that you play, or the way that you envision music?
Well, there's a composer named James Tenney who is kind of associated with me because I perform a piece of his for solo gong or tam tam that was composed in the 1970s, and so I get asked to do this piece a couple times a year, and he's someone who I think we can learn a lot from, because there's a new book that just came out of previously unpublished writings of his, and he wrote a lot and he did a lot of different things. So, and he's not that well known compared to some of the people he was sort of close with and associated with, like John Cage, etc. So, but he was kind of the first person to do a kind of a remix at Bell Labs in the 1950s, like remixed an Elvis song, which is something that no one really tried to do, but also was responsible for this kind of shepherd tone phenomenon of like the endlessly rising tone that is attributed to this guy, Roger Shepard, but actually Tenney was the one who really developed the idea, it turns out. It's talked about in the book a little bit. He was also involved in a lot of elements of the art scene and cinema, like in those really fertile periods, like 50s, 60s, 70s. So, and he also he wrote a couple of very academic kind of treatises on how sort of music functions. And so I think he's a really, really interesting person to explore.
Beautiful. Thank you for this recommendation. Before we start the part of the workshop, I have a last question for you, and please don't hesitate if you have questions on this more interview side. Please raise your hands as well. But before we start showing you this workshop, I wanted to know if there's still something that surprises you with sound after all these experiences with it, and what would it be?
I get surprised by it almost every day, just from things I hear. But like I'm saying, I think the fact that sound is so simple and yet so complex is the thing that's constantly surprising to me, because it's just literally a kind of membrane in your ear going back and forth, and that's it. But the fact that it can do that in such a complex way that can mean so many things,
it's always surprising.
Is very profound to me. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rrose. Are there any questions maybe from the audience, or we can maybe start first with the workshop, and then after, if some people want to come closer, this place is really a space where we allow people to navigate the way they want, the way they can. There's going to be some videos that will be shown here, but please don't hesitate to come closer if you want to see from closer how all these words come into action, and non-emotions, but more like rituals are appearing with the machines. So thank you very much for your answers. And here it is, the workshop from Rrose.
Okay, well, yeah, I thought, rather than sort of showing you how my techno music works and opening up Ableton Live and that kind of thing, that it would be more interesting to talk about an earlier project which I created right before, or it was really the master's thesis I created before launching the Rrose project. And I think my approach to it speaks a lot about how I approach techno music and why maybe the music is a little bit different from others. So I composed this set of 8 studies for automated piano. So I was really focused on working with this piano that could be controlled by a computer. And I found, the time here is pretty limited. So as far as how much I can play, I think so there was a piece that James Tenney wrote, who I mentioned before, for a player piano that I heard a version of, and the fact that this piano could create these patterns that seemed completely alien and electronic and mathematical, but also like the kind of universe was opening up. I thought I need to try and do something like this. So I think if we have time, maybe I'll play this piece by Tenney, and then I can play one of the pieces I created for the piano. I just brought this sort of slide up because this is just sort of a list of some of the concepts that I think guide me. And the harmonic series, the last one here, is pictured in the background. And that's an idea that I think everyone has some sort of knowledge of, but it's something that's completely simple to describe and has very profound implications. And I think that's what I'm always trying to get after in my music. And that's what informed partly the piano piece that I'm going to play by Tenny and mine. What you see here is, it's like a string vibrating. If a string was pulled from here to here and it was plucked, it would vibrate at once on its axis, like back and forth, but it would also do it twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, and the amount that these different vibrations would happen would be, the ratios between them would be dependent on like what kind of string it is, how thick, and environmental conditions and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of complexity around it. But what happens when a string vibrates is when the harmonic series is created, you just have this series of numbers, the numbers that we know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's basically the harmonic series, which is the simplest thing in the world, and yet the kind of rhythmic connections and what can emerge from this is very profound. I mean, this helps us even understand how bridges might break when wind is blowing and this kind of thing. So there's implications much beyond music. But I found a lot of inspiration in the harmonic series. And even within that, these other kinds of thresholds between pitch and rhythm, feelings of rising and falling, like these paradoxes of thinking two opposing states are kind of happening at the same time somehow, which is sort of what interference is. So that's an overview of this. Let's see. So this piece by James Tenney is about 5.5 minutes. So I'll start with this, and then I'll talk about my piano compositions and what I created kind of as a follow-up to hearing this. So before you get immersed, I'll just mention that what you heard was a pulse, and then a pulse twice is the rate, and then a pulse coming in 3 times, and then you're going to hear 4 and 5, and you're hearing it build up like that. Oh, sorry, forgot about this. So what you heard, as I mentioned, was the notes, the pulses being added, pulsing at harmonic rates, but also he's connecting the pulse rate to the actual tone. So the second tone that comes in is twice the frequency, or an octave above. And he's tuned the piano to make them these pure notes that correspond to the harmonic series. So as each note comes in at pulsing at a rate that's, 3 times, 4 times, it's also, the note is equal to the third harmonic, fourth harmonic, fifth harmonic. So he's creating this connection between the harmonic note and the harmonic pulse. And then as it speeds up, it all gets very confusing. And that to me is really fascinating, kind of pulling these different kinds of perceptual areas together and making them fuse and cross over in strange ways. With this very simple premise. So in the middle, he kind of does something where he changes the speed of the pulses in this kind of logarithmic way that they then change, they sort of eventually flip their, I think so that the lowest one becomes the fastest and the highest one becomes the slowest, or something like this. It does this kind of morphing thing that happens. That's when we hear all the variations in the rhythms. So when I started composing with the piano, and actually this original piece was made with a player piano where the holes had to be punched in this paper roll, so it was very, very time consuming. I was able to work with this Yamaha piano where you can just connect a computer and then make your dots in your sequencer and just make it play, which is much, much easier. So one of the first pieces that I wrote was taking this idea of these harmonic pulses, but I thought, what would happen if it wasn't just a pulse, but it was a sort of stepped glissando as the kind of basic shape. So I'll show you what that looks like. So the way I work, even with electronic music, is I don't really get into these very complicated ways of using the technology. Like, I'm not a master of the technology, so I find these sort of simple ways to work that I can still get to some interesting result. But and people look at this and say, this looks really complex, because I made these scores for all of these, which I used to use the Logic program, which had a kind of MIDI scrolling, like piano roll type view. And I made these scores by just actually doing screen captures and bringing them into Photoshop and then just like collaging them together. So it's very like I didn't have some program spit out the score. I had to like piece together a bunch of screenshots to make these things. But what's shown here is the piece is, these are the notes of the piano from lowest to highest. So the basic shape of the piece is one steady glissando from the highest note to the lowest note, which you can see. So it's just like if you were, and I call it diatonic because I'm just using the white keys. I tried it with all the keys, which would be chromatic, and I found this was a little sort of more melodic in a way, even though it's such a rigid piece. So I thought that was a nice push and pull. And also, when I show you the video, you'll see that what happens on the keyboard is very interesting to watch if it's just the white keys, because you really see the patterns clearly. So I started with just programming in that da 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 all the way down, just like that. I thought there's no personality there, there's no emotion, there's nothing, there's no profound experience there. But if I can take that very sort of neutral starting point and just apply some rules to it, can I get something to emerge that feels kind of profound? And that's without saying like, oh, I'm going to express an emotion here or here. It's like I'm still doing things that are very much systematic, but somehow I find something emerges from that feels profound. So I thought, okay, what if I start 16 of those at the same time, but one of them is going to start and end at the end of the piece. One of them is going to go twice as fast, so it will end in the middle. One of them will go 3 times as fast. It will end here 4 times as fast, five times as fast, which is the same idea of using the harmonic series. So they will be moving at harmonic rates. And when the one that goes at twice the speed finishes, then another one would start. And so I did this, but in the program you could actually just take these notes and then say, flip them around. I just flipped it and moved it. And oh, that's pretty cool. And I made this symmetrical thing. And then it shows that in order to hear the details of what's happening in the beginning, you need to be very slow in the tempo. So when it's very dense, the tempo is very slow. This shows the tempo increasing and decreasing. So I kind of played with that curve so that you get this feeling of steady movement, but you hear all the details. Because if this were to just go fast in the beginning, it would just blow right by. You would hear just a and you wouldn't hear anything. So it has to be very slow at the beginning. Then it gets very fast in the middle, as fast as the sequencer could go, 990 beats per minute. And then it gets back down to very, very slow at the end. And what happens is you can see inside of here, you get a harmonic series, which is kind of getting squished or something like that. So this is a close-up view of the last 5 measures. So you can see that this is the harmonic series, like, this is 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes, 6 notes. But because they're all moving down, they're getting compressed and squished and sort of converging on this one note. So I will play the piece for you. And when I presented this in concert, I just prepared everything in such a way that I could, I like this idea of the performance space not necessarily being, I feel like it's about everything happening in the space. It's not just about a person standing on the stage sort of doing a thing that you're supposed to watch. To me, that's only one very limited way of thinking about what live performance is. So part of this project with the piano was playing with those ideas, and I put a lot of effort into thinking about how I'm going to stage this as a performance, as a live performance with the machine being on stage playing. So I wore a suit and I went up onto the stage before each piece to press the button to play it. And then I went back down, sat down, let it play. And then for the next one, I would just go up, press a button for 8 different pieces. I also realized that I could use a projector to make my visuals. All I needed was a video projector and a spotlight. So because I had a spotlight coming down on the piano, I projected that, and you just see the light reflecting off of the keys as a kind of visualization. So there's no technology in between. I'm not sending the MIDI out to make something, but it's just the light on the keys that actually gives you these lines and dots. So in other pieces too, you see the dots moving. Those are the black keys. It's just a little bit of light reflecting off of the black key. But in this one, you just see the white keys depressing, and you can actually see the patterns that were shown in that kind of graph. You can actually see them on the piano keyboard, which to me, when I discovered that, was amazing, that you could actually create something like that with this instrument that seems like, it's something of the classical era. You don't think of it as mathematical, but it's actually just a bunch of buttons, in the end. Yeah, I was saying I took some liberties at the end just to change how long certain notes are held and how loud they are, but I didn't change the pattern at all. So I could actually, I found it interesting that I could bring out this humorous element with doing so little as well. So there was so much that I could communicate with in this very mathematical structure, you know. So yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Do we want to use the mic for the questions? Or?
Do we have a mic to, or, yeah.
I guess we can just bring this one.
First of all, thank you for both the pieces. They are incredible, and I like them a lot. But during your piece, I noticed that the pattern made when there were chords played, like when the notes started to play together after the downfall of the notes, the pattern would create first some seconds, then some thirds, then some fourths. And did you plan the speed of I don't know if you used MIDI, but of the files to achieve that, or was it because of the mathematical relations between the notes that thing happened?
Yeah, it's the mathematical relation that makes it's the harmonic series. That's why you hear seconds, then thirds, then fourths, and you hear them spaced out. But the overlap of them, what I was changing, what I had to really make the decision about was the tempo curve. So how slow to start it, and then how fast to ramp up the tempo. And I was just trying to find that tempo curve that would bring out the most clear detail in what was happening, that wouldn't just blur things, that would still give you that momentum of the moving through the pattern while hearing all the details. You know what I mean? So, but I didn't make any changes to the process that I set out. You know, so the process and how the notes were created is completely fixed.
Hello. Firstly, thank you for the nice interview, nice work for the interview and for the talk.
Thanks.
My question was, we can definitely see the influences you have with the minimalistic movement from America, serialism, and dodecaphonic stuff. Have you been influenced by kind of concrete music, the concrete movement at the same time happening, like in France and in Europe, at the same time minimalistic guys like John Cage and were doing their things in America? Because you were talking about the complex points sometimes when you are playing with synthesizers, but the most complex sound you can have, it's a recorded sound, because it never can be replicated in a way. Have you been interested by this approach of field recording and treating your sound with this kind of material, adding to your electronic or harmonical stuff with piano or whatever you could use?
I'm very much interested in field recording and in musique concrète and this kind of thing. With this particular project, I really started with synthesis for some reason. I have pulled in some recordings in a few tracks, but I'm very, very careful. There's one track I made which actually is just completely built on this recording I made of two lawnmowers, like grass cutters in the distance, that were kind of coming in and out of phase. Which to me is really similar to what a synthesizer does, and it sounded like that too. So I think there's certain phenomena that I'm attracted to, whether it's a field recording or a synthesizer. I don't actually see them as being that separate in a way, but I can sit down and play with a synthesizer and find these things. I also like the fact that you can, in a way, be so precise and controlled with it, whereas a field recording, often it has a lot of environmental elements too. And so you don't necessarily get the purity of it. So I think there's a tension in what I do, which is trying to create that complexity and chaos from something which is pure and simple at its core. So there's less of a tension with that when it comes to real world sound. But I think that, I also hear it and find it too. Sometimes you hear a bird, do something that just sounds like an oscillator, or these kinds of things.
Yeah, because with some objects you can create like an oscillation with a real material, like just squishing some metallic things, for example, and really being in micro elements and being not too far from what you could have with playing on a synthesizer.
There's one track of mine, which is a techno track, that the core of it is built on this creaky hinge from the door in the studio at Mills College where I did my master's. There was this very creaky hinge that you could really control like a synthesizer. So
what's the name of this track? I'm really curious. What's the name of this music you're talking about? If you remember it.
What did I call that track? I would have to. I actually don't remember the name of it right now. It's what did I call it? Let me think about it. But so it just starts with, I kind of quantized the clicking of it, so that it could go with a beat. But you get this, as you move the door, you get this strange change in the timbre of it, But you could also speed it up, and then it becomes the tone, So yeah.
Okay. Thanks for
Sure.
for this.
you very much for answering all these questions and for this wonderful presentation of how you approach music. We will find Rrose tonight in the different types of performances and sets that appear during Abrupt. Thank you very much for your presence here.
Thank you.